All right, so good evening and welcome to tonight's segment of the faculty lecture series. For those of you who don't know who I am, I'm Jess Gilardi, professor and director here, and I coordinate the series. So thanks for attending tonight's lecture. There's just one more lecture for this semester series, and that's tomorrow. It's a special guest lecture featuring a guest to campus, Dr. Heather Hancock, who will be doing music, and that will be over in Leon Memorial Hall. This evening's event is presented by Professor Peter Evan Costas from the School of Visual and Performing Arts. Professor Costas is currently an assistant professor of art and photography and is a Colorado-based, though formerly Chicago-based artist who uses mixed media to reconstruct and unearth memories and imagination. Through a combination of lens-based work, sound, sculpture, performance, and painting, his work drives both communication of the veteran experience and to use memory as a catalyst for fiction. Much of his practice relies on eliciting sensory experiences around sound and touch and how they affect our heavy reliance on the visual. Having served on submarines as a sonar technician in the U.S. Navy from 2011 to 2016, his personal experience within the military is a constant totem of time, growth, humor, trauma, and secrecy. Professor Costas received his Master of Fine Arts from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago in 2022. So tonight's lecture is titled Constructing a Chimerical World. And in his words, constructing a chimerical world is an ongoing photographic project about reconstructing memories from Peter's past, most notably while on board nuclear submarines in the Pacific Ocean, using themes from historical cartography, mythology, and experiential map making to inform his experiences. Much of this project deals with both visual and oral subject matter that undulates between the real and the imagined. He often uses this blurred line between fact and fiction in his work as a means to arrive at truth via misunderstanding. So help me in welcoming Professor Costas.
Awesome. Thank you, Jess. Appreciate it. And thank you, everyone, to coming. I know it's we had to do a little change of the room here, but hopefully this is still pretty good. And not really related, but my tinnitus is acting up really hardcore today, so if my voice is a little weird or anything, I'm basically just hearing from like this side of my body only. But this will have maybe something to do with my project as well. Constructing a chimerical world, I'll get into what the chimerical is and sort of the history of that and how that sort of relates to my own work. And I kind of want to start off with a lot of things that are sort of influencing my work, influencing where I'm going. So this is an ongoing project I've been working on since around 2021, and some things a little bit longer that sort of influence that as well. But a lot of this stuff that I'll show in the first few slides or so will be things that I'm kind of questioning in the world, and especially questioning in regards to geography. So chimerical is a weird word. This is a pretty old word. Usually around like 400 BCE was when this term kind of became most common with originating. But chimerical usually means something that is formed from various parts of something else. It's usually in regards to animals, but a lot of times chimerical is something that feels kind of like it shouldn't be possible or it shouldn't belong, like those things shouldn't belong together. And I'm really interested in this terminology of chimerical, as a mythological subject, but also in a conceptual art form as well, where it makes us, a lot of times art sort of makes us think about connections of making networks of things that might not always seem like they're connected. Making otherworldly connections, I guess, is where I like to go with these. But a lot of chimeric animals became the subject of, especially during the medieval time and early cartography. So I'll get into sort of why these animals kind of influence the way that we actually view the world in a bit here. But a lot of times we sort of use these animals or these creatures, sometimes people might refer to them as monsters, to try to understand the unknown of our world, right? There were a lot of, historically in society, people were maybe not exploring the world as much as we're able to today, right? We have ships, we have airplanes, we have even Instagram, even the internet, where we can see, oh wow, this person's doing this over here and they're so much cooler than me, I want to go do that. People didn't have this inundation of imagery that we have today. And really, that's a really recent thing. Photography was invented in 1838 in both England and France, but primarily in France. But really, it took photography until around 1900 to become something available to a lot of people, and that's with the Kodak Brownie camera. I don't want to go off too much of a tangent on that, but the Brownie camera was the first kind of iPhone of its time, where it allowed a lot of regular people, or somewhat regular middle-class people, to afford to get a camera and experiment with photography. So similar to the iPhone today, sort of democratizing imagery. And the reason I bring up that in regards to mythological creatures is it allows people accessibility to something that's unknown. And I think in the same way that a lot of this imagery does it, it allows some accessibility into what is scary, into what is, maybe something unimaginable, but now we can imagine it. One of the probably most widely known version of the chimera is the chimera of Arezzo. This is a Tuscan or Etruscan piece of art from Tuscany, Italy. And this is from around 400 BCE. I mentioned that before. This is a fully bronze sculpture, and it is about, if I'm remembering correctly, about waist height. But it's fairly large. This is a large bronze piece, and it basically is trying to describe this chimera, which was this mythological creature that probably didn't exist, but maybe it did. A lot of people thought it did. And essentially was kind of like the body of a lion with the back. It had like a goat's head coming out of its back, and the tail was actually a snake, and it breathed fire. And it was basically like reaping mayhem through Tuscany in a kind of pre-Christian time period. So a lot of the chimera iconography had to do with these sort of unknown creatures causing sort of like unknown catastrophes. A lot of people think maybe the chimera was actually a series of wildfires that maybe were kind of like detrimenting the Tuscan landscape at this time, and they made sense of that by making that into a mythological creature. All right, so, this cut off a little bit, that's all right. But here's what I want to talk about: geography and what I like to call the illusion of knowing. And I think especially modern, current, even though we're not really modern, I guess, whatever, postmodern, whatever you want to call it, but current contemporary geography it's safe to say we feel fairly certain about the world as it exists on maps, right? We feel fairly certain that we know exactly where a lot of countries are, right? But that's how we sort of dilute the world. That's how we sort of organize the world into things that we can know and understand, even though we may have never even left the United States. Maybe we have, but even if we haven't, We can still assume based on satellite images, cartography through thousands of years, and the maps that we see, maybe even Google Maps, that we understand the world. But there's a lot about geography that actually limits your vision. If anything, map making in a lot of ways is about framing your vision, similar to photography. Photography is putting a frame on the world. In a lot of ways, photography is about the subtraction of things in life. It's about subtracting what's unimportant and highlighting what's important in that image. In a lot of ways, photography is a medium that we use to cut away things. And I think geography is really similar in this way. Cartography, also known as, that's the term for map making, and geography is the study of the world, basically, the visual world. In a lot of ways, we represent maps, or show maps, or make maps that only show specific things, right? Maybe it's only roads, maybe it's only buildings, maybe it's only the names of stuff, the names of towns, but we don't really see like individual human experiences in a map, right? We don't really see. We may see some war in a wartime map, right? But we don't get that full scope usually of things that are happening, potential conflicts, potential harmonies. There's a lot of things that are excluded from a map because you can't include everything, right? But so in a lot of ways, our form of understanding the world is based around cutting away things we deem unimportant. Anyone know what we're looking at here? Okay, good, cool. Somebody got it, yes. I've purposely flipped this so that you're not looking at a north-south view of the San Luis Valley. We are probably somewhere up in there, and Sangre de Cristos are kind of on that other side. You can maybe see the great sand dunes up there in the top left of the screen, and these are the San Juans. We have the San Luis Hills, and then probably down there is like Taos, kind of down in that part to the right there. But did it take you maybe, you were pretty quick, maybe it was the math thing, I don't know, but did it maybe take you guys a little bit of consideration to see where you're actually, this is just where you are right now, right? Do you feel particularly attached to this? Do we feel seen here? Not particularly, right? Interesting, right? So this is a photograph made with a satellite over, from space. But this is basically the way it is, right? This is a photograph of the San Luis Valley. But the interesting thing is maps, whether they're drawn with someone's hand, whether they're rendered in a computer, whether they're captured with a camera, don't always show the full story of a place, right? And they might not even connect with you, even if they're showing where you live. They might not even connect with you, right? They may in some ways, right? And maybe this is a different way of looking at it. But we are so kind of trained to look at the world in a certain way because of maps. We're trained to look at that north and south and east and west kind of compass direction, right? We're trained by longitude and latitude. We're trained in even like time zones. We're trained in that way. We're trained in thinking about seeing the world in a certain light, where you have England in the center usually, because most of the old explorers were from England or from London. They made Greenwich, which is a neighborhood in London. They made that the center of the way we see the world. So Greenwich Mean Time, that's the center. Everything else is based off that. That's why New Zealand is always forgotten in the corner. because England's in the center, right? So a very imperial, kind of colonial way that we still approach the world, right? We've gone really far from the time, I guess, well, maybe some people could argue no, but, kind of far from the British Empire time, but a lot of the ways that we see the world are still so entrenched in that language, I guess. So there's a language to how we even look at the world. And it's pretty fair to say this is where we live, and we've probably, to some varying degree, have all been to certain parts of this valley and might know it. Some of you might know it better than others. I've only been here since August, so still figuring it out. But there's a lot in this I have not been to for sure. And there's something about maps, especially now, that make us think about this concept of being certain of something. Being like, okay, we can see this. I feel like I can just go right here and hike, right? I can just go for a hike right there. I'll be fine. Nothing to worry about. Probably not the case. There's probably bears. There's probably high cliffs I could fall. It's probably dangerous to an extent. But because we've given ourselves this illusion that because I can see it, it's going to be fine. Someone's been there before. Everything's okay. And maybe it is, hopefully. But this image, where do we think this is? Mars, good. Somebody got it. Cool. Yes. This is a place that probably no one in this room, maybe, I don't know, I guess if you guys win the lottery or something and become best friends with Bezos or whatever, but maybe. But most likely we'll never go here. Yet we have imagery showing us the entire planet of Mars. There's actually, if you guys are curious, if there's any space nerds in here, the Google Earth version of Mars is called JMars, and it's literally an entire globe, every satellite image stitched together of the entire Mars. And so you can look at Mars, a planet no one's ever been to that's alive, that I know of, I guess. Maybe some aliens or something, I don't know. But as far as we know, no one's been there, yet we can map the entire place and say that we know where certain mountains are, where certain craters are at, where certain continental divides and shifts are at. And we can name those having never stepped foot on it. And that just baffles me, that we have so much certainty to the point where we can know somewhere we've never been. Isn't that kind of a weird concept, a weird thing to think? And this is sort of that combination of photography and geography that gives us this illusion of being too certain of not only the world, everywhere outside of it, outer space too. So another thing that is very dependent on this issue of being certain is nautical charts. So you all heard I was in the Navy from 2011 to 2016. I was a sonar technician on nuclear submarines on fast attacks. And you guys, some of you are probably really sick of hearing this, but I'll keep saying it because this is my work. But nautical charts, so part of my job, a lot of it was listening to the ocean. A lot of it was basically listening for potential contacts, potential things to investigate or things to stay away from and not be detected. That was a part of it. Another crucial part of my job was also navigating the ocean. I was not a navigator per se, but my job really heavily influenced how we navigate the world's oceans. And I was primarily in the Pacific Ocean, the largest ocean on Earth. And nautical charts, naval charts really, are crucial to safely navigating the ocean. And the thing that's interesting about them, they constantly change. You need to update these charts, or at least the Navy needs to update these charts at least every year, and that's the maximum time Usually it's every 6 months or less. The reason for that is a lot of the ocean is changing drastically. The topography, the underwater topography of the ocean is changing so quickly due to the forces of water, essentially. And technically the land is too. Like all of the San Luis Valley is shifting too. It's just slow or slower. But this is an example of what happens when you don't pay attention to charts changing. So this is the USS San Francisco, January 8th, 2005, collides at flank speed at 525 feet underwater with an underwater mountain. They collide headfirst into a mountain that's underwater, and it's all because I believe it was 3 years. They didn't update their charts for 3 years, and the old chart they had said they were good, said there was no mountain there. There was a seamount there. And it's not that the mountain, kind of spontaneously erupted there, but there were enough shifts in the soil, enough shifts in the ocean floor that it literally did change that, or just by enough, it changed that location of that seamount and caused this submarine to collide with a mountain, which is pretty crazy to think about. But this, unfortunately, I believe killed at least one sailor and injured about 20 others, and luckily, they all could have lost their lives here. If you're wondering about the tarp, this is the Navy's really lazy way of making sure that super secret squirrely stuff doesn't get photographed. So that's what they did. There's something crazy there, and they just covered it up with a tarp. And then, yeah, but there's basically this green wall or bulkhead there. If that was ruptured at all, probably the entire crew would have died. So this is something that I was very familiar with. This was about 6-7 years before I was on a submarine, but it was something we were constantly aware of. Like, hey, you can ground and ram into a mountain potentially if you're not paying attention. So, as a sonar tech, a lot of times I had to spend an enormous amount of time looking at potentially thousands of contacts on my screen at one time, making sure that we don't hit anything, because there's so many more close calls than people realize, and a lot of it is due to this illusion of safety, illusion of certainty in maps, in charts, in photographs even. And something that I realized as a submariner was things are constantly changing. There's as much as we love plans and we love sticking to routines, those things a lot of times don't always work out with the natural world. So many different things are changing. I like to relate a lot of that kind of thing. I'm really interested in naval superstitions. Probably, I didn't have a lot of favorite things from the Navy, but one of them was superstitions. I'm really into those. And there's a lot of mythology and a lot of kind of underground mythology in the Navy that's not really spread out too much to the rest of the civilian world. So it's kind of it feels like an extra secret kind of thing you're a part of. But this is a Greek piece of pottery that has basically the mythology around Odysseus interacting with sirens. And sirens were these mythological creatures, a lot of times were associated with femme fatale, usually were associated with creatures that looked beautiful but usually resulted in sailors' deaths. And I'm bringing this up because in a lot of ways, the siren may represent that seamount that the USS San Francisco ran into. It represents some illusion of safety or illusion maybe of beauty or illusion of something fine, and actually resulting in a shipwreck, resulting in a death. And that's been something that's been talked about in naval superstition for a really long time. So this is probably the most common version of that, but Basically, in Homer's Odyssey, Odysseus is kind of insane, and he's trying to he wants to interact with the sirens, which is a little ridiculous. But they tied him to the mast there to try to prevent him from falling overboard. Basically, it's kind of a ridiculous story. Anyway, so I'm going to talk about maps and monsters. You guys maybe have seen medieval maps before. A lot of times in the Middle Ages, maps had this really crazy abundance of illustration one, but also illustration of creatures, and a lot of times these mythological creatures that we have a hard time nowadays imagining even exist, but were very real for people back then. A lot of them had to do, or I guess some of them had to do with creatures causing shipwrecks, causing, a lot of times even the story of Cthulhu came from these kind of mythologies of creatures causing mayhem and causing distress at the sea, so preventing a lot of people from really exploring the world in a lot of ways. But also, there were also elements of these sea creatures and sometimes mythological, what we call phantom islands, that were actually represented in a good way, like sort of providing safety to navigators or sailors, and providing maybe wonder and something different and something, other than the New World, there were even these other places that probably don't exist. We might think of Atlantis, this one is La Isle de Saint Bourdon, and this is also known as St. Brendan's Island. St. Brendan of Clonfert, I believe, was an Irish saint, and he, right before the time of Christopher Columbus, apparently went on a voyage west to evangelize a lot of these islands in the North Atlantic Ocean. He was not going to the New World, weirdly enough, but there were all these islands that they said they sort of converted to Catholicism in the North Atlantic, St. Brendan's Island being one, but that island nobody can ever find that. It's not something that we think exists, but it's a place that people at that time referred to as kind of this lucky, almost holy grail type of place to find. It became this mythologized place. And a lot of people think they'll refer to St. Brendan and the whale. I know it's really hard to imagine this as a whale, but this is kind of how they imagined a whale in the Middle Ages. And the whale representing a place of safety. So this Irish saint essentially was saved by a whale in the North Atlantic and given an island for his endeavors. So there were both good, positive, and negative aspects of these sort of monsters that existed in maps at the time. Now I'm going to get into what's mostly my work that I've been working on, my project I've been experimenting with for the past 4-ish years, and I basically use fiction, and I use a lot of my own mythologies to inform a place that I'm constructing. So I use a lot of my photographic practice, a lot of my painting practice, and a lot of my sound art as a way to try to construct a lot of my experiences on the submarine that I cannot really talk about. And a lot of the reasons I can't talk about it in my other previous talk was legal reasons. So I remember when I was 23, I signed a document that I cannot legally talk about any of the missions I went on for 80 years from 23. So at 103, I can talk about this stuff legally. I guess I could talk about it, but it's not really worth the risk of potentially going to jail. So that's one thing that's sort of heavy, where it's all right, if I live long enough to even be, not have dementia and all this stuff to talk about it, that would be great, but I don't know. Um, and another part of it too is a lot of the experiences that I had on a submarine don't translate well to, land, lubber, civilian life. Sorry, but they don't translate well. They might not sound as interesting, right? It's really difficult to explain a lot of these things, a lot of these stories and experiences and emotions that we went through without sort of like doling into a sort of murky, I guess mythology would be the way to describe it. It's hard to describe a mythology that other people are unfamiliar with. But I found that constructing a mythology and showing that mythology is a lot more, A, a lot more fun, and B, a lot more convincing usually. So I came up with a word that doesn't exist in any languages I know of, absectum, and this is what I call my environment that I'm constructing to try to describe my experiences through, or describe a lot of the things that I did through fiction. So in 2021, I've always been really interested in maps. As a kid, I would draw maps indefinitely. I used to read atlases for fun. And so drawing maps has always been this thing I've been really interested in. And I kind of started this process by drawing maps of places that don't exist. And a lot of the kind of texture to these, the sort of blue-gray stuff, is usually kind of this combination of what's called cyanotype and calitype, also known as Van Dyke Brown prints. These are alternative photographic processes, mostly from the mid-1800s. Cyanotypes, they're usually blueprints, and I'll show you a few in a second here, but they are literally what like architectural blueprints kind of came from. It's just that, it wasn't an art form at that time. But they're an old process, and one of the things I love about cyanotypes the most is that you can never repeat the same image twice. So you can repeat things that look similar, but because it requires so much fluidity in the process, there's even an element of painting that kind of comes along with it. It's really difficult, if not impossible, to sort of make these repeats. So I really like this idea of making photographs that are not repeatable, and to that extent, sometimes I'm really interested in making photographs that are not archival. A lot of photography is geared towards making archival work. Archival meaning it's going to last way longer than your lifetime, if not hopefully indefinitely, right? Kind of museum archives, right? Something we can look at hundreds of years from now and see kind of what life was like. And I support a lot of that photographic archives. But in my own work, because I'm dealing with memories that are actively changing as I'm alive, memories that maybe already changed, fully changed, and also memories that I can't fully divulge to people, I'm not really interested in making archival versions of that because they're changing all the time anyways. To me, it would feel untrue to the experience to try to focus on making archival images, at least in my own project here. So a lot of these are the Van Dyke Brown cyanotype mixtures where I'm experimenting with making places that don't exist based on real places, right? So based on things I've actually experienced, places I've actually gone to, but constructing a world that basically doesn't exist. So a lot of these cyanotypes I'm playing around with basically different modes of making them, different iconography. A lot of it is blending things that maybe shouldn't belong in the same instance, right? So a chimera of sorts. This is a totally Van Dyke Brown print. And there's something I like about the handheld part of these. I know this is a talk, so you're viewing it on a screen, but holding on to these is kind of my preferred method of showing my work. A lot of times having this sort of tactile involvement really kind of increases that experience of what I like to call debris, or work that feels like it's kind of a totem to something else but isn't necessarily the thing. So a lot of these places do exist in the real world, but based on how I'm printing them, it's changing the reality of that real place. The next thing I started to do was experimenting with painting, and painting primarily for the camera, not painting for making a painting to sell, even though that's cool. I'm primarily painting as a temporary form to then photograph. This painting was only up for like 2 nights, I think, and this is a combination of ink, like India ink, charcoal, acrylic, and I love using motor oil to paint. That's like one of my favorite materials. But combination of paper, canvas, tape, different substrates, and then straight on the wall as well. And trying to think about my paintings as a kind of improvised cartography. So improvised map making, just making maps purely on memories of feelings more so than memories of places as they exist. Because I don't really want to show those like exact places that I went to. I'm not really interested in that. So a lot of these are, based on these emotional places, I guess, emotional coastlines, feelings of going into port, feelings of exiting, feelings of going to a port for 7 days and only remembering like 30 minutes of it. Those are the things I'm more interested in trying to recreate through my work than anything else. I continued this for probably about a year, and I'm still doing this painting process, but a lot of this work I started experimenting with different materials. Some of this stuff I'd pick up from like the garbage. I literally got a table from the garbage when I was working on this, and there was something nice about taking materials that people no longer wanted and then improvising with those as well. Some of you may have already seen this work, but this is some of my 3-dimensional digital renders I did. So I experimented with a 3D modeling program called Autodesk Maya, and this is kind of the same program used for like Pixar animation movies and a lot of kind of CGI type stuff. But I was really interested in the concept of making photography from something that isn't even, there's no camera involved, and it's even kind of less than cameraless because you're going to have to construct a virtual camera in the program to then make images with that. So I was constructing 3-dimensional kind of spaces, I guess, within this digital software, and then that was specifically for the camera as well. So a lot of these do actually have to do with real places that I went. I used a lot of satellite imagery of actual places we went on the submarine, but because it's pretty hard to differentiate what's actually being seen here, that feels kind of like a safe way to sort of describe those places without giving too many clues. And I experimented with this this digital tool with kind of reimagining vessels, naval vessels, submarines, and just sort of this concept of being a sailor overall. And this is this is basically what I call Orchard of Ships, and this is a digital 3D ship I essentially made in this software and then photographed and used I used a lot of photography as the sort of texture in a lot of these, so kind of using photography as a way to make physical patterns and physical kind of like, I guess texture is the right word for that. So these were kind of fun to play around with, and I'm still still making a lot of these digital renders to describe my experience. You may have also seen this as well. This is talking about archival or sort of almost anti-archival work. I started printing on food, let's see, about 3 years ago, and this is the last time I'll do this one, but I printed on cheese about 2 years ago. It still exists, and this stuff changes all the time. So I printed cyanotype photographs on cheese, and this actually changes the photograph over time. So like 1 month, it might be totally blank. I've actually seen the cheese literally like eat the image. And another time I've seen it kind of like really vibrant, even some of the like pores and I guess different chemical reactions that are happening. This is encased in resin, so it's safe, but a lot of this stuff sort of, starts bubbling out and sort of changing as it ages. And so this photograph is being twisted and morphing over time. And it really feels like a heavy metaphor for a lot of my experiences after getting out of the service and dealing with memories that I am grappling with, some that I want to remember, some that I'd rather forget. And then also dealing with like not really being able to totally divulge or tell anyone about that, or really even have any kind of common ground sharing with people, because that's really difficult to find with submariners. So a lot of this work too is, this is sort of the backside of one of the cheese prints, and I'm really interested in basically the fungus and the decaying of the photograph as it comes through the back of the print. So this is, it's still using that photographic chemistry, but it's basically just shifting that totally through it, almost totally destroying it. It's becoming something else. So another kind of project I was doing, and this is kind of related to more of what I'm doing nowadays, but last year I started playing around with a lot of USGS maps and like public domain maps, and like actually altering maps that exist in real time, and using Photoshop primarily and some other programs to basically composite maps together and sort of change what we're looking at, or change the perception of what we're looking at. So this is the island of Oahu in the middle of Lake Michigan, just north of Chicago. So two places that I have a lot of experience in and a lot of history in, stories, but I'm interested in kind of combining these two places that are very, very different and seem really mismatched, but doing it in a way via this language of map making. I started experimenting with this language of map making also with my alternative process work. And in these next couple of images, I did a lot of digital simulations of alternative processes from the 1800s. So this is actually I basically figured out how to simulate in Photoshop the effects that usually happen from gum bichromate, which is another process in photography. Really difficult process to sort of master, but I was able to, at least on the red filter, figure out how to sort of simulate that through different settings in Photoshop. So this isn't a filter, it's more of editing by the numbers and using numbers to sort of simulate what chemically happens in a photograph. I guess because this screen is super dark, but this is another version of that sort of map alternative process simulation. And then these are mostly of Lake Michigan. During the winter, a lot of that lake really freezes over, and you get these crazy like disc-shaped ice things that just go on for like hundreds of miles. And I was really interested in that for it totally changing the environment of Chicago, kind of representing Chicago like as the antithesis of like the Sears Tower, like this sort of the typical way we view a city. So I was kind of interested with that. And then now in the San Luis Valley, I'm really interested in using a lot of the geography of this area and a lot of the existing sites throughout the valley, especially the mountains as well, but mostly the valley. I'm really interested in constructing a kind of ocean here, or what feels like an ocean to me, using pretty much only sites in the San Luis Valley. So that is supposed to be a ship. This is the Great Sand Dunes, was probably obvious, but that ship is totally a place in the San Luis Valley. So this is actually, I believe it's like an abandoned demolition derby site that's just like maybe 15 minutes north of here. So I'm really interested in finding these sort of sites around the valley that to me feel like ships or feel like places that could be translated into an ocean and I know that the San Luis Valley used to be an ocean, or at least a large lake. Maybe ocean's not the right word, but I think Lake Alamosa was a thing. But that kind of, it's basically an environment that used to be heavily influenced by water. So I'm experimenting with, kind of early stages of experimenting with translating the San Luis Valley into this kind of mythological ocean of sorts, and just some of the, more bizarre and less looked at places in the valley as well. All right, so this is what I call the Traumatar, and this is an object that I made in 2021 at a residency I did in Michigan. I did a blacksmithing, month-long workshop there. And it was really cool. I did blacksmithing almost 10 hours a day for a month. And I was able to make this instrument, and it's totally made out of steel. And I constructed every single part of this, with the exception of the string I didn't construct, the bind that holds the string, and the piezo pickup are the only things I did not make. Everything else is constructed, and I was able to, Jesse Rosecrane was my instructor, and I was able to figure out how to inflate metal using high pressure air and super high temps. So I believe we would heat this up to about 3,000 degrees, and then you basically weld a pocket in this object, and then inflate it with about 80 psi air, just enough so that you get this kind of pillow, this metal pillow essentially. But this is a really interesting way to make sound. So I'll do a small performance for you guys in a second here, just so you can kind of hear what this sounds like, but I'll explain a little bit ahead of time. I'm really interested, because I was a sonar technician on subs. My whole job was to listen to the ocean. I was listening to the ocean for, I've spent at least almost 14,000 hours underwater just listening to the ocean. And I want to construct, I've made a few instruments like this. This is probably my favorite one, but I'm really interested in sort of reimagining a lot of the sounds that I heard. I think the sounds I heard in the ocean are one of the most interesting parts of my job that I had to do. And I'm really interested in experimental sound. So this is not necessarily meant to be music. It's more meant to be an experimentation in where sound can go and where sound can kind of take us, and how it can really change the way you interact with the world. Because as a sonar technician, I can tell you, I've listened to some incredibly bizarre sounds and some normal ones too. And it really changes your perception of the world. And I didn't have any, other than seeing out of the periscope, but that's just the surface of the ocean. I didn't have any, there's no windows on a submarine. So there's no visual, there was no visual cue to what I was listening to ever. It was all sound. So I try to use a lot of my experimental sound to sort of take people to maybe bizarre soundscapes that are not typically what you might hear. So, just gonna set this up for a second. Then, let's see. You mind if I borrow this stool? All right. And then, if you guys are okay with that, I'm just gonna record this real fast. All right, 1 second. This thing came off. Oh no. Well, that sucks. It usually doesn't do this, but all right. All right, so that didn't go as planned. It's the first time I've had the string actually break off before, but great timing. But that's essentially, usually it sounds a lot more tonal than that, but it's an experiment, so still a work in progress, but that's it. Thank you all for your time. Anybody have any questions? Good. Thanks, Tony.
So you can't talk about what you did. You sort of demonstrated things that might be similar to what you heard. When you can't see anything, what are you doing with the sounds, right? Like it just, and you probably can't say, but it just.
Oh, you mean what am I doing on the sub with the sounds?
Yeah, like what are you?
Oh, sure.
How are you using them? Like what's
Sure.
the point of it all, right?
I guess without getting too secret with it, it's how we find ships. It's how we find vessels. Sometimes we can even find, we end up finding a lot of fish, but one of the most common things, and it's not secret information, but just like lesser known, is we generally find ships by like their propeller sounds underwater. So like just by listening, I can discern like the sort of chugging noise of like a large merchant vessel versus like a smaller trawler ship, or a trawler boat, which would be like a fishing boat, and then a lot of other like naval vessels. So that's how we can be like, okay, there's a naval vessel maybe 200 miles this way. We're not going to come up because we don't want to actually like see it. We can just discern that via sound and still stay undetected. And then with submarines, usually submarines are really quiet, but they're not all made the same, but it's usually mistakes that tend to be kind of emitted. So I guess I should explain water is about water's about 4 times as powerful with sound as we hear in the air. So whatever you hear me talking would travel 4 times the length in water, and then in steel it's 16 times. So anything like if someone drops a wrench on a hull, we can hear that potentially from like 200 miles away. If there's a lot of times with submarines, maybe they have some kind of like engine mistake or some like weird thing in their propeller that we have to try to discern, and that would be enough to like track someone or find someone and track them and know where they are. So a lot of it is for reconnaissance and essentially like underwater international espionage, honestly. So I can't say who we do that against, but I'm sure you can infer. Yeah, and weirdly enough, most countries are doing that to each other all the time. It's just sort of not talked about, Sometimes you guys might see it on the news, but it's happening all the time, everywhere, usually. But yes, but at the same time, so all this stuff that we have to pay attention to, we can't be detected either. So if we're detected, it becomes like an international incident, or like you die. So it's there's kind of a real stress to it, I guess. I remember being kind of, I guess, really close to Singapore, and that's one of the biggest ports in the world, and seeing, so we do listen primarily, but we have screens, but the screens basically only show you, it essentially looks like the Matrix. They just show you like blips of frequency of sounds coming through, so you can kind of see the sound per se. But like my whole screen was like green, basically like everything it was like 1,200 ships were around us at the same time, and we couldn't be seen. So trying to navigate in between these ships that can actually cut through your hull, like the propeller of a merchant ship can literally cut through like butter through a submarine's hull, and trying to not get sucked into that. It's pretty crazy, but I think honestly it's probably the most similar job would be like an air traffic controller, in civilian life, I think, probably close enough to it, except that's, airlines. But I don't know if did that answer your,
Yeah.
cool. Yeah. Oh, sure.
Same time, exactly. Would you say that those flip screens that you're listening to and looking at are analog or are they digital?
They are kind of a combination. So they used to be analog because we've had those for quite a while, but they're both. Nowadays, they're definitely, it kind of depends like what ship you're on, I guess. But I was on older boats or like LA class boats, and they generally had kind of a mix of analog and digital, but I would say the majority of the newer ones are all digital. So.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting how analog in our culture changes to digital, and now we're
Yeah.
going to vinyl records, but CDs were the thing,
Oh, totally. Yeah.
how your signaling or your vision of your job would have been altered by the digitization process.
Totally.
Interesting.
Yeah, actually I did have to use one totally analog thing. It was a really old device. It was called a photometer. And it was like basically just this really simple machine that sends one really loud pulse straight down to try to measure the fathoms below the ship, below the submarine, so you don't ground into stuff. And that only used like paper with a little needle, and it would just like show you like basically draw on this piece of paper, but it sucked though too, because if the paper jammed, then you would like have to open the whole thing up, and then all of a sudden you're like, all right, we don't know what the depth is for a minute, it's weird. Anyways.
Are the Navy's nautical maps available?
Probably not, no. You can look it up. You can look up FOIA, so non-FOIA. So if you look up non for official use only, that's going to be possibly available. What's the name of that thing? The RP-33 is not naval charts, but that's like oceanographic information. That's unclassified, so you can look at that. But most of those naval charts are going to be classified because basically like it's all the information that they have about a place, and they don't want like any nation being like, oh, we know exactly how to get around here too, because we basically have to employ all of our own oceanographers to get all this information. So it's a whole thing. There's probably old nautical charts that are available. So like old, like probably World War II. I think most World War II data now is unclassified, but some of it's still classified, which is insane. I mean, it's like literally 80 years ago, but yeah, they don't like sharing that stuff for the most part, but yeah. Any other questions? Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you all for your time. Really appreciate it. Sorry the instrument broke, but it does sound more interesting, but yeah. Cool. Yeah, for sure. Thanks. I appreciate it. Thanks, Margaret. Appreciate it. Thanks again for coming, Patty. Appreciate it.